Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this month's Digging In with TPS MTSU. We're really excited to have you join us for our first in this series for 2022. So a couple things as we get started. As always, we are recording this session so that those who can't join us live, you'll be able to catch this later on our YouTube channel. So for those of you with us live today, please be sure to keep your mics muted. Unless you're responding to a question from one of our presenters. If you haven't already done so, be sure to rename yourself. And as always, we want these sessions to be interactive. So that is one of the pluses to being able to join us live if you're able to, is that we do like to make these as interactive as possible. So feel free to go ahead and open up the chat box, introduce yourselves. And as we go through, feel free to, drop comments and questions there in the chat box, and we will respond to those as we go forward. And then, of course, you have reaction buttons. I don't think we're doing any polling today, but again, we always try to make these as interactive as we can. And of course, we have our Padlet, which you can access here at this address or using this QR code. And this is what we have been using throughout this series. And so you can find on that Padlet page the link to our YouTube channel. And then for each session, we have a link to the newsletter that we're featuring, as well as any additional resources, PowerPoints, those kind of things that we have featured throughout the webinar itself. And so again, if you're wanting to go back and view any of those, use any of those resources, that Padlet is a great place to go and find all those things very nicely organized. So with that and our housekeeping done, I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Dr. Stacy Graham, who's going to talk to us a little bit about our theme for this month.
Thanks, Kira. I'm going to share my screen so we can take a look at the newsletter together. I'm going to make it a little bit larger. Hold on, let me see if I can do this. There. All right, so we wanted to do music because music is always a fun topic, even though we've done music before. So if it sounded familiar to you, it's because we did an issue on Tennessee music specifically, as well as on music in general as a primary source back in May 2010. So it's been a while. And both of those previous newsletters on this topic, you can find linked to from the blurb on the first page. One thing I love about music as a primary source is because, well, for one thing, it's engaging. Students all listen to some type of music. And so even if you just get their attention in terms of, oh, that's weird sounding, or that sounds so scratchy and old, or that's weird, why are they singing like that? You've immediately gotten their attention. And in a way that some other kinds of primary sources might not be able to do in a classroom. Another reason why I like music as primary sources is because a lot of printed primary sources, a lot of documentary record primary sources really speak to the elites in society, the people in charge of governments and institutions, the people who are famous, the people who are most educated, whereas music can represent a segment of the population that may not always be heard on an individual level. So when you're talking about folk music, that's like the voice of all sorts of common people who may not leave individual primary sources as part of the historical record. And then also in the early days of the 20th century, when we get to the first commercial music recordings, that also speaks to the growth of a popular culture, which, though it might not talk about specific individuals, does talk about a large swath of the population and how they respond to different changes in cultural, how culture can reflect different changes in socioeconomic and other kinds of events going on in our history. So all great reasons to use music. Plus it's just totally fun and it exercises your hearing as well as your sight. So a lot going on. One of the other links that's from the blurb is a collection of contextual essays, which I will come back to when I show you the resources at the end of the webinar today. But I did want to just run through really fast what's in here. We have a lesson idea on Stax Records, which is in Memphis, Tennessee. And today it's open to the public as a museum. You can go in there and tour it, and it's fantastic. I just took my daughter there last summer. But this is very important to the development of music, and especially, you know, blues, jazz, rock and roll. So it's a very important part of Tennessee's story as well as the national story. And we would love to be able to talk you through this lesson idea today during the webinar, but most of the music is still copyright protected. And so YouTube would shut us down. So you're just gonna have to explore this one on your own. Now we are gonna hear about Eliza Jane and women's cyclists in a little while, as well as Billie Holiday's Strange Fruit, which is really cool. The other thing that we feature is the new lesson plan based on the song This Land Is Your Land by Woody Guthrie. And so this is just kind of a half-page description of the lesson plan. See if it's something that might be right for you in your classroom, especially if you teach 5th grade or high school. And then on page 4, we're looking at, of course, 4 additional primary sources. And I'm going to return to a couple of these in the resources section at the end. But for right now, I think we should just dive right in to our very first lesson idea presentation. And is that going to be October? All right, I'm going to stop sharing and turn things over to October.
Hi, y'all. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. So I did my lesson idea this month on music and protests, specifically looking at Billie Holiday's version of Strange Fruit. So just for some background context on who Billie Holiday is, she was a jazz and blues singer who really came to rise in fame in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. She was born in Philadelphia in 1915, and she began her musical career as a teenager in Harlem, New York, a little bit after what we would consider the Harlem Renaissance era, but still very much inspired by the big blues and jazz singers of the Harlem Renaissance era. During her career, she sold out the Carnegie Hall twice. And after she passed away in 1959 due to liver disease, she won 4 Grammys for the Best Historical Album. And she was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame and the National Rhythm and Blues Hall of Fame. So a very prominent figure in jazz and blues music history. So for the history of Strange Fruit as a song, it was actually started off as a poem, originally written by a Jewish school teacher named Abel Merpel. And when he first wrote the song in the early 30s, he set it to music, and his wife, Anne, who was also in this photo over here from the Library of Congress, his wife, Anne, kind of sang it at small gatherings with other teachers and friends in their home. He introduced the song to Billie Holiday in 1939 at a New York nightclub, and that's the first time she sang it, was in a New York nightclub. She fell in love with the song and then went on to record her own version later on in 1939. And it was instantly very popular. It was given out and sent to government officials as a way to combat lynching. And ended up becoming a song of protest during the Civil Rights Movement. So if it weren't for copyright, I would play this song for you, but I did just want to include a link since this PowerPoint will be up on our Padlet. This is the version that I like the most because it has, it's a historical recording of her singing the song in 1959. So looking at the lyrics here, I'm just going to read them for you since you can't hear her sing them. Southern trees bear a strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood at the root, black bodies swinging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees, pastoral scene of the Gallian South, the bulging eyes and the twisted mouth, scent of magnolias sweet and fresh, then the sudden smell of burning flesh. Here is a fruit for the crows to pluck, for the rain to gather, for the wind to suck, for the sun to rot, for the tree to drop. Here is a strange and bitter crop. So as you're going through that with your students, I would recommend pointing out words that they may not understand. So popular trees, what does that mean? What is that tied to the South? Pastoral, maybe again, they're setting up this very juxtaposition towards the violence of lynching and what, you know, our imagery of the South is. So helping them understand those imagery words. So you could go through as a first read when you're giving this to your students just for language and then go back again for meaning. And to help you with those meanings, I developed a couple of discussion questions that you could give your students. So when you're in the classroom and listening to the song, you can ask them, what is the tone of this song? And then what is the strange fruit that Billie Holiday is talking about? And then how is this a song of protest? And I didn't include this question, but I would also ask them again, especially in that second stanza, what is the imagery of the South that we're given versus this kind of hidden, well, not so hidden, but that hidden violence of lynching, and how is the songwriter and Billie Holiday, when she's singing this, setting that up for us in our minds. And even in the first stanza, talking a lot about fruit and then this kind of violence of blood. And that's an interesting take. And then I did want to show you guys this video. This was made by PBS. And it talks a lot about the effect of Billie Holiday's song, Strange Fruit. So I'm going to show that to you now. By the time. Can you hear that? Or do I need to? Okay. I just know sometimes I have an issue with sound.
And Billie Holiday records Strange Fruit. It enters into the public discourse in both literature and painting about lynching. The anti-lynching movement had been going on for some time before the recording of Strange Fruit. There were anti-lynching campaigns throughout the United States. Strange Fruit became not just a song of protest, but a kind of elegiac song, a song of mourning. And it was a song that also sparked kind of activism for Black communities.
There had been legislation introduced into Congress on many occasions to make lynching a federal offense. And each and every time it was filibustered or ruled over by Southern legislators.
During the 1940 effort to promote passage of a federal anti-lynching.
No, I'm having internet issues.
By the time Billie Holiday records,
During the 1940 effort to promote passage of a federal anti-lynching bill, the lyrics of Strange Fruit are sent to every member of Congress. Neither this tactic nor years of intensive lobbying by the NAACP ever succeeds. Federal anti-lynching legislation is never written into law.
Strange Fruit became a song that's been claimed by African Americans as part of an artistic tradition that's both beautiful, yet one born in protest.
Oh my gosh. Well, there was only 20 seconds left. It just talks more about the effect of the song. Hopefully, if you play that in your classes, you won't have as many issues as I just did. But yeah, so that would give your students kind of an example of the importance of the song and how it was used to keep moving forward the anti-lynching campaign. And if you guys want to learn more or teach more about the anti-lynching campaign, Dr. Graham has done a wonderful literature look at the anti-lynching campaign from Ida B. Wells, and that's linked in my newsletter idea, and it's within our close reading context on our website. And so then I imagine that you would end the discussion with your students as to what other songs or genres have inspired political or social change. So some examples would, if you want to keep going with the civil rights movement, you can look at different hymns that we're saying on a gospel's perspective, not just the blues perspective. You could also look at like psychedelic and hippie music from the 1970s anti-war effort. You could look at hip hop and rap from the 1980s and 1990s in the African American community versus specific songs that maybe look at policing and the rise in African Americans in the prison system. So there's a lot of different eras that you can look at for other ways that songs and music have encouraged and spoken out against political or social issues. And even songs today are still written about issues when it comes to political or social change. So ask your students what they hear on the radio today that speaks towards that. And that's going to be a way to connect that different music as protest theme. So were there any questions?
So I don't think we have any questions, but I think that was a really interesting lesson idea. And thank you for sharing those video links. I think that gives people some different ways to think about possibly using the song and connecting it to kind of its larger historical significance. I know just reading the lyrics to it are powerful enough, but I think having a chance to actually listen to her sing it and doing that with the classroom would be very powerful. So thank you, October.
No problem. And again, I'll just show the lesson plan really quickly while I have it up. Besides those 2 video links that I included in the PowerPoint, I also linked to another video that was also YouTube, so I didn't want to get any copyright issues. But this first 3 minutes of this longer video really delves into the history of blues music and other ways that it's been used as a protest. So if you want to give your students a general look at the genre that she's singing from, I also included that video. And then there was a history article on Billie Holiday. So if you're wanting to give your students more into her life, there's a Today article from the Library of Congress. And then the lyrics are in the Library of Congress as well. So if you didn't want to use this PowerPoint that we'll have up in the Padlet, there's also this document here that has the lyrics as well as more history and an essay written by a historian on Billie Holiday, the original writer, and the history of strange fruit. So there's even more document resources that you can give to your students along with this lesson plan.
And I just wanted to say that video that you can't show us, but this talking about the development of blues music, I watched the whole thing and it was really, really interesting.
Yeah.
And so just if you're interested in music in general, it's only 10 minutes long. They actually walk you through, and it's 2 people speaking that both have their separate podcasts doing one together. One approaching it from a classical music point of view and one approaching it from more of a hip hop point of view. And it's really interesting. It makes you think about it in a new way. And also, I love these histories behind the songs. This is what happens when the Library of Congress puts things on the National Registry. I know that there's another one of these linked to in some of our other lesson plans as well, including the This Land is Your Land lesson plan. They're really great for context and the story behind the song. And you can see it's only 2.5 pages long, so it shouldn't be too long for your students to read. So I just wanted to say that because these are really cool resources.
Thank you. And yeah, that video, I only have you look at the first 3.5 minutes because that's when it delves into the history, but the rest of the video looks at it from a very musical theory perspective. So if you're not a history teacher and you want to teach the history of music in your music classes, that one really delves into all the notes and how blues shows up into different genres and how it affects the history of music, not just on a racial level and what this song means as a protest, but what is blues as a genre and how it has informed other genres of music. So I second Dr. Graham that it's a really cool video if you're into musical theory.
All right, so let's shift gears a little bit and talk about Eliza Jane and women cyclists. And you might be scratching your head, one, maybe not familiar with who Eliza Jane is, and wondering what about music, what could be interesting with music about women cyclists? Well, this actually sort of connects to what October was doing with her lesson idea, thinking about kind of music and protest. In this one, though, we're going to look a little bit more at kind of music and how it can help us to understand kind of debates and shift in society norms during any given time period. And so kind of understanding, again, how music reflects cultural change. So to give a little context here, so the song we're going to look at, Eliza Jane, was written in the 1890s. And so if we think about some of the, events and things that are happening at the time period, specifically with women's issues, we have women's suffrage. And of course, that's represented here with the image that you see with Susan B. Anthony kind of standing there front and center with the female cop behind her. This is a great political cartoon that we've used in the past. You can see that's, again, fairly critical of women's suffrage, but it really does kind of encapsulate some of the critiques for those who were opposed to the women and the work that they were doing. We also have the emergence of cycling and its popularity amongst women, which is represented here with this ad that we see, again, from around the same time period that the song Eliza Jane came out. And then we also know that there were kind of changes happening in women's fashion. For example, bloomers, which we can see here with the image on the right. And those actually date even from before the late 1800s. But again, we do have this kind of shift in women's fashion that was happening. So let's think about kind of maybe how all of these things converged within society. And we're going to do that by looking at this song, Eliza Jane. Now, before I play part of it, I'm actually going to show you where you can access the lyrics to follow along with me. This is from the Library of Congress, and so you can find those, and I will drop this link quickly here in the chat box for those of you who are following along with us live today. So you can open that up and again, be able to listen to it or follow the lyrics as we listen to the song here in just a moment. You can click on that image there and you'll be able to zoom in there to be able to read the lyrics more closely. So let's listen to the song Eliza Jane. So again, this is from a performance that I found on YouTube. And this is one thing that I think is really cool about some of the older music is sometimes, you don't always find performances that are saved in the Library of Congress, but sometimes you can go and just, Google search and maybe find where someone has actually performed these older songs. And so it gives you a easy way for your students to have a sense of kind of what they sounded like. So again, as we listen to this, I want you to kind of think about what this song is about, what perspective it is coming from. So enjoy. Can you guys hear it?
Eliza Jane, she had a wheel, its rim was painted red. Eliza had another wheel that turned inside her head. She put the two together, she gave them both a whirl. And now she rides the parkway sides, a 20th century girl.
No more new skirts enfold me, though much my papa grieves. But baggy trousers hold me in their big pneumatic sleeves. But where you see the bloomers bloom, I sits my wheel astride. I make a sight, would stop a fight, as in the park I ride.
Oh, have you seen Eliza Jane a-cycling in the park?
Have you
Seen Eliza Jane, the people all remark. She shouts,
hi, hi,
as she rides by, the little doggies bark. For we all have a pain when Eliza Jane goes cycling in the park. This is Emancipation Year, the woman movement's on. Eliza plans to be a man, it's sad to think upon. She thinks she needs the ballot now, her freedom to enhance. She wants to pose in Papa's clothes, it is for this she pants.
Once I had a nice young man, the last was long ago, as gay and fair, as debonair as any man you know. He saw me ride in bloomers, he screamed and quickly fled, and as he ran, my nice young man in trembling accents said,
"Oh, have you seen Eliza Jane a-cycling in the park? Have you seen Eliza Jane, the people all remark. She shouts,
hi, hi,
as she rides by, the little doggies bark. For we all have a pain when Eliza Jane goes cycling in the park." Eliza's brothers saw her ride, and each one took to drink. They made it flow to drown their woes, so that they need not think. But there are woes that will not drown, not even in a well. And in the worst of their great thirst, Eliza hears them yell. "Eliza dear, we sadly fear you have not started right. You will not see more liberty by being such a fright. Asylums yawn for you, my dear, and in the books we read how bloomers that too early bloom soon fade and go to seed. No more upon her red-gwinned wheel fair Eliza flirts.
no more I ride the parkway sides in bifurcated skirts.
A park policeman ran her in one day in early spring, because he thought Eliza taught the little birds to sing. Oh, have you seen Eliza Jane a-cycling in the park? Have you seen Eliza Jane, the people all remark. She shouts,
hi, hi,
as she rides by, the little doggies bark. For we all have a pain when Eliza Jane goes cycling in the park. We all have a pain when Eliza Jane goes cycling in the park.
So that's our song Eliza Jane, which will now be playing in your head for the rest of the evening. You're welcome. So let's think a little bit about the song. So what's the song about?
I will go ahead and say that this song is clearly from the point of view of somebody who's a little scandalized by this girl who's just trying to be modern.
Right, so it's pretty critical of Miss Eliza Jane. So how do we know that it's critical, and why is it critical of her? So what is she doing that they are criticizing here?
She's riding a bike.
Right, so once she's riding a bike.
She's wearing bloomers.
Right, she's wearing her
bifurcated skirts. Yep,
yes.
Yep. So she's astride, and that's indecent, of course. She's probably trying to vote.
Yeah, she's acting too much like a man. It mentions her want for, let's see here, let me switch over for just a second. We can look at the lyrics here. So it mentions it being Emancipation Year and the women's movement. She thinks she needs the ballot now, her freedom to enhance. So again, it's critical of her, again, trying to, the women's suffrage movement and her trying to access the ballot and have a political voice. And then again, tying together this idea of, her riding the bicycle, her wearing, her bloomers, and her hoping to have a political voice in the ballot. So why do you think that they are tying all three of these things together?
It's probably all the same generation who's into all of these things. And so they're conflating it as this big, huge threat. And also just the fact that women are acting a little more independent. Like all of these things are a different form of independence, but they all present a big independent threat.
Right, they're all challenging those traditional gender norms that, you know, people had in their minds. You know, again, we think about, you know, earlier in history, you know, women's roles is very much limited to the home sphere, and they don't have, you know, much of a public role. There's limits on, you know, their movements and those kind of things. And so again, here we have, you know, the bicycle all of a sudden gives women a new way to be able to kind of more independently move around beyond, you know, just having, you know, the horse and buggy and the other forms of transportation they would have had in the past, which again, many times it was thought to be scandalous for a woman to drive her own buggy. So we have this song now. If you're following along with the lyrics and listening to that performance, you may note as you get towards the end of the song that the lyrics available from the Library of Congress are slightly different than the ones that are performed here. And of course, you could talk with your students about why these last couple of verses are a little bit different. I also thought that it was interesting in the lyrics. Of course, it talks about her brothers and their response, and it talks about a boyfriend that she had. And again, all of these, you know, how her actions are causing, you know, negative reactions for all these people in her life, from her father to her mother to her brothers to a boyfriend who just couldn't deal with Miss Eliza Jane riding her bicycle through the park. So again, you know, it's a really interesting way to again look at this commentary around kind of the women's roles, changing of women's roles, and how that ties into different points. So let's look at, wait, I don't want you to play again. All right, so we're going to compare that to some other commentary from the time period. And so I found this newspaper article that you could use with students to kind of, again, you know, layer in some other voices, other perspectives from the time period. So in case you have trouble seeing this excerpt, I'm going to read it aloud. And I want you to think about what is the perspective here. And then we're going to think about how it compares to the Eliza Jane song. So this excerpt is titled Women Bicycle Riders. In Washington, D.C., there is a society called the Women's Rescue League. And just now, it is making war upon the bicycle as a means of rapid transit or pleasure for women. The League proclaims that immorality is alarmingly on the increase among American women, and all because of the horrid bicycle. It may be that the ladies of the Rescue League are actuated by the loftiest and most sincere motives, but for all that it is unfortunate for themselves that they have too little confidence in their sex. It may be, too, that the rescuers are in a measure right when they say that the bicycle promoted immorality, but a mere assertion that it is so does not make it so. Undoubtedly, the bicycle tends to more familiar association between men and women than some other ways of enjoying companionship. But if the logic of these rescuers is good to apply to bicycle riding, it is good to apply to buggy riding or walking. It is the guilty mind that suspicion most troubles. No doubt women would be safer if they were kept in seclusion, and they would be safer still if they were in their graves. But there would be no thought of their safety if men were fitted to coffins and the lids nailed down. Now, a true woman does not compromise her modesty a whit more on the bicycle than she does riding a streetcar or a buggy. All things are evil to the evil-minded. It so happens that a great many women use the bicycle for convenience. They have to go from place to place on legitimate business, and it is quite as proper to go on a bicycle as it is to walk. Then very many women ride the bicycle for health and others for pleasure, and if there be anything immoral in it, is discovered by others than those who ride wheels. It is very true that some women bicycle riders adopt costumes that might be spliced out a little with the same kind of material, but the same is very much more true of some men bicyclists. The fact is, these are not the days of the Mayflower, but there are just as many good and true women now as there were in those days. The members of the Rescue League might better attend to rescuing their own minds from the many unfounded suspicions which appear to keep them in a state of agitation. So what is the perspective that we see here in this article? How does this compare to our song?
Okay, this article is sympathetic towards women like Eliza Jane. And this article would probably not appreciate the song Eliza Jane because all things are evil to the evil-minded. So in other words, the people who are upset at women like Eliza Jane are just looking for things to be upset about, and this is it.
Yeah, there are a couple of just really kind of classic lines in here that I think would be fun to, again, kind of help your students to kind of, again, pull out and think about perspective. So, there's a section where it talks about, women would be safer in seclusion, or better yet, if they were in the graves, but it would actually be just as safe if men were like in coffins and they were nailed down. So again, this it's hyperbole that they use here to make their point. And then, of course, the line that you mentioned, all things are evil to the evil-minded. And then the way it ends with, we're talking about them do the things that they're doing to kind of keep themselves in the state of agitation and to be upset with people, again, like Miss Eliza Jane. So thinking about these two pieces together, so the song Eliza Jane and our newspaper article here, how did the two of these together help us to kind of understand the types of societal debates that were happening in the late 1890s around the role of women, and then the ways that the women's roles were changing in society?
Well, one thing that I like is the connection between the development in technology and transportation, which is the bicycle, and these, social liberation for women. It's because technology seems to be so neutral, but it's not the way that it's applied to societal norms. And October says that it shows that, as we've seen with the women's suffrage movement, not all women support greater independence for women. So there's quite as much, if not more, of a backlash among women trying to hold on to traditional gender roles, which I think is something students really need to realize. It's not a men versus women thing at all.
Yeah, those are all great points. So if this is something that you want to kind of dig into more with your students, the Library of Congress has a very informative essay on songs of women's suffrage that, again, kind of gets into a little bit more of the background of the period, looking at some of the songs. And you'll note here in this article that they have linked to several different things. And again, it's one reason I love these articles is, it gives you some great background and context, but then it links you to some primary sources that maybe you wouldn't have found on your own. This is actually how I found the Eliza Jane song, which you'll see is linked there. There is another good one here, Your Mother's Gone Away to Join the Army. And I want to play just a second of this song to give you kind of a sense of this one. Again, to think about the different types of songs you could pull out from this time period if you wanted to explore this. So again, we're going to listen to about the first minute or so of this song. So we'll take a listen here.
By his father's knee, could see that he was crying, he was sad as he could be. He sobbed and said, I feel so blue, as tears ran down his cheek. Oh, father, where is mother? She has not been home for weeks. His pa said, lad, the tale is sad, she's down at Suffrage Hall. She's gone to fight for women's rights, why there's their bugle call. Hear the tramp of their feet as they come down the street. Gee, those girlies look sweet, they're all dressed up so neat. Your dear old ma just took a fighter's place. She likes the smell of powder 'cause it's always on her face. There's no rat in her hair, you can see she don't care. Holds her head in the air, gee, your mother's a bear. Tramp, 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 the girls are marching. Your mother's gone away to
So again, with this song, we get that again play about, you know, how women who are working to gain their suffrage, you know, are upending gender norms. And so here we have this, you know, this likening to them joining the army. Again, thought to be a very traditionally masculine role. So again, some different sources there that you could pull in to again think about kind of women's roles and the societal debate around women and women's suffrage in the late 1890s. So hopefully that gives you guys some things to think about. And again, you'll have that Eliza Jane song playing in the back of your head now for the rest of the evening. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Stacy to talk about some of the other resources that we found.
All right. Thanks for doing that, Kira. Now I have that last recording in my head too. So I'm gonna spend the rest of our time, the next 15 minutes or so, looking at some of the resources that we linked to from this newsletter. So I am going to go to share my screen. Oh, right, here's the anti-lynching close reading exercise that October referred to earlier. And so back to the newsletter. All right, so as usual, we have important links over on the right-hand side of page 2. And these are all really good music-related resources. A lot of them are things you can just start using in your classroom right away if you teach that grade level. So the first one is Songs of the Labor Movement lesson plan, which is a very extensive lesson plan that one of our former graduate students created for us. It's looking at folk songs and the labor movement, particularly focusing on 2 songs. One that was popularized by Pete Seeger and another one that was popularized by Paul Robeson. So you can talk about a lot of those issues mid-20th century, you know, from the Great Depression all the way through the 50s and 60s with that one. We also have an older lesson plan that we haven't looked at in quite a while, but it's looking at a very, very famous folk song, which I'm sure many of you have already heard of, Barbara Allen, which is one of the oldest folk songs known in the English language. And so this is looking at the evolution of it. And this is really great for English language arts lessons, as well as music. And so again, looking at the lyrics of this and how the lyrics change over time and listening to different versions of it. I know I used to hear versions of this when I was a kid, and I still find it very lovely today. So that's, again, more of an English lesson, whereas the first one's more of a social studies lesson. We also have a primary source set on music and dance that we did quite a while ago. You can see we have a Memphis picture on the front, Sun Records. In this same collection as this picture, there's a picture of Stax Records, which you saw, which we've linked to in other places. So here we have even more additional links from this first page, and then a whole collection of different types of music-related sources, including sheet music and photographs, an opera bill, and just kind of, you know, some recordings, some lyrics sheets, some posters, photographs, etc. So a variety of things, because music is not just in one format. And then we have a close reading exercise that is based on the song Lift Every Voice and Sing by James Weldon Johnson. And I just posted about this on our Facebook page yesterday, because the Library of Congress just wrote a new blog article about this song as part of their In the Muse Performing Arts blog. So I thought it was really cool because we already had a pre-existing activity about this song. And now here we have a blog entry that talks even more about the history of the song. And it even has James Weldon Johnson's own words about his experience writing the song. And he's a person who also has a Tennessee connection. He's associated with Fisk University because he taught there kind of later in his career. And they actually have his death mask in their special collections library. But this is just a really nice article about the history of a very important song, which is considered the national anthem for Black people in America. And so for Black History Month, this was something that they posted about. And then thinking about songs as historical artifacts, this is a really good graphic organizer that we link to off of our graphic organizers page on our website. Historical artifacts. I like thinking of that because people think artifacts are just things you can touch, but songs also can be artifacts. And so this is putting songs into historical context and thinking about them, analyzing them. This is good for elementary school, middle school, and high school. So we use that graphic organizer a lot. This bibliography of resources, this is quite extensive and it's a bit older. You can see it's 31 pages. So maybe not every single one of the links in here works, but I went through this before and I know Kira did as well. It does have some really helpful things if you want to do further research or if you have, high school students who want to do further research. It's very extensive. And then the Library of Congress has a lesson plan on its teachers page called Music and U.S. Reform History, Stand Up and Sing. And so this focuses on the period of the Second Industrial Revolution of the late 19th century and music expressing societal change, which is something we've talked about already. It also links to song sheets as well as sheet music. Now, what's the difference between a song sheet and sheet music, you ask? Well, song sheets are just lyrics. They're just sheets that have the words to the song because a lot of popular music would have just been put to some sort of tune that everybody knew already. And so the tune was less important and it was the words that were copyrighted and that were published. And then they would just say, sing to the tune of X, Y, or Z. And so that's what a song sheet is versus sheet music, which has the words and the music on it and both are copyrighted. So there's just a lot of tunes that were just part of the American repertoire that everyone was just expected to know. All right, I'm going backwards a bit. And then there's a link to a cool online exhibition about jazz singers where you can read more about Billie Holiday and other jazz singers in American history. There's also a presentation on Dolly Parton and the roots of country music that we bring up quite often in some of our things. So again, a really great way to connect American history with Tennessee specific history. And of course, who does not love Dolly Parton? Okay, and there were a couple more things that I did want to show you. On page 4 specifically, let's take a look at these resources. So we have a political cartoon from Puck magazine. Puck is something that we use all the time because they have really great illustrations, particularly from the late 19th, early 20th centuries that really have a lot of social commentary about American society. And so this one is about Mountain Dew, which no, it's not just a soft drink. What did it used to mean? And of course, there's some really great folk songs about Mountain Dew. My favorite, I think, is Grandpa Jones. But anyway, so this is comparing Mountain Dew with Rocky Top. And so 2 songs that your students may or may not already be familiar with. They should be familiar with Rocky Top, right? They all learn Rocky Top in Tennessee. It's like one of our Tennessee state songs, right? Well, thank goodness Mountain Dew is not one of our state songs, but Mountain Dew is referenced in Rocky Top, like one of the verses. So they can learn about the salacious origins of that phrase because it's alcohol, which probably still tasted better than the soda does. Anyway, And then we have this really awesome link that October found to a work that's about 10 minutes long. It's a film, but it's also a piece of music. It's a whole composition called Symphony in Black, and it's by Duke Ellington. And this is one of the first films that was written by an African-American describing Black life to a popular audience. And so it kind of tells a story about one person's life, but it's supposed to symbolize the experiences of a lot of African-Americans at this time. So in the early 20th century. And it's very, it would be very good with a Harlem Renaissance or a Jim Crow lesson. It's also just really great in terms of just American society at this time. And it has a very young Billie Holiday in it, which surprised me. So I thought that was really cool. And so this recording, the whole thing is on the Library of Congress website. So there it is. I hadn't even seen this before. And then we have I Wish I Knew, which is a song that was popularized by Nina Simone. And so there's a YouTube recording of her singing it that's linked to here, looking at Dr. Billy Taylor's original composition. And then lastly, the last thing I want to share with you is some recordings of Amazing Grace, which there's a whole collection about this song at the Library of Congress. So I went through and they have about 51 different recordings of different people singing this song over decades. So they have really early recordings from like the 19-teens and 1920s, all the way up to things from like the 1980s or even more recent than that. So, you know, they don't actually have the Sam Cooke one available to listen to right now. And I was very, very disappointed about that because I like Sam Cooke. But so you can go and you can listen to the Johnny Cash one, the Elvis Presley, but I like some of the older ones in particular. You can read about these articles and essays here are really cool in terms of giving context. So if you go to The Early Life of Amazing Grace, they talk about the person who wrote the words to it and his career as a person who worked in the slave trade and then later in life became an abolitionist. And so how the song kind of reflects his own personal conversion and how it might fit into the history of the slave trade. And then also how this song became so popular on both sides of the pond, so to speak. And for those of you who like shape note singing, there are several recordings of early shape note versions of this song, which are just amazing to hear. And there's a whole article talking about the history of this song in that, well, it's 2 paragraphs, but anyway, it should be an easy read for students. And then looking at the early sound recordings. So these are going to be the ones that would have been recorded by specific people. But also you had a lot of people go into like church congregations and record whole congregations singing this together. So you hear the preacher talking and really kind of the emotional resonance of this song as part of a sermon and the call and response. There's a lot of recordings from African-American sermons. And it's incredible to talk about cultural differences and all the different ways that you can sing this song and its importance to a lot of different groups of people in American history. I also like, I linked in a version by the Boston Camerata, if you want a really kind of early, they're a modern group, but they try to sing like an early hymnal style, like from the late 18th, early 19th centuries. And then this band is some wacky, where are they from? They're from like Finland or Lithuania or Estonia, one of the Baltic states. And there's some pop band, but they do a really amazing version of this song. So it's a really interesting juxtaposition. So yes, the Library of Congress has not just really cool recordings of songs or song sheets or lyric sheets or things like that, but lots of contextual essays to help students see, well, why are we learning about these? Because they tell the history of the United States. That's why you can tell it in song. And so, okay, this is the last thing I'm going to show you. On the very, very first page, a link to the contextual essays. And this is part of the Library of Congress Celebrates the Songs of America collection. If you just go to the articles and essays tabs, There's so many different resources within here. I can't even show you all of them, but to go in, for instance, to historical topics, to see how these songs talk about these different movements in America and how they relate to socioeconomic changes. And they have lots of examples to go with each one. So I hope that you can explore this on your own and you'll really go down the rabbit hole here. But it's also good places for your students to get legitimate contextual information so that they can use these as evidence when they're supporting their arguments and writing their essays. All right, I am going to stop sharing and I think we're going to wrap it up, right, Kira?
Yes. So as we get ready to wrap it up, just a couple things. One, again, a reminder that we do have all these resources available on our Padlet. So do take a moment to go and check that out, and you can access those things from the Padlet page. And then if you are interested in receiving PD credit for today's session, you can complete our short survey at the link provided here. For those of you attending live, we'll drop that in the chat box. If you're watching the recording, you'll just need to type in the web address here. Be sure to click that you are wanting to complete the survey for today's session on music. Fill that out and we will send your certificate that you have participated and viewed this recording or this session. And we usually send this out about once every week. So I usually try to do that towards the end of the week. So again, just do that and that's how you will receive your PD credit for today's session. We do have a number of other PD events that are coming up over the course of the next few weeks. And so as you guys are filling that out, I'll mention just a couple of them. Next Thursday, February the 17th, we will be doing a session on Frances Perkins and the role of the Secretary of Labor. So if you're not familiar with who Frances Perkins is, she was Secretary of Labor during FDR's administration and is responsible for things like the 8-hour workday and child labor laws and many things that we take for granted today, but have definitely helped to shape our work life. So if you're interested in learning more about her and her role during the New Deal era, you can email me to sign up for that session. We will also be at TCSS in Memphis towards the end of the month. So if you're going to be participating in that at all, be sure to look for our sessions. We're doing a virtual session early in the week and then 2 sessions at the conference in Memphis. Next month on February the 8th in our Discover Tennessee History series, we'll be doing a session on our World War II curriculum and kind of beginning to preview some of that. And then our next Digging In session will explore the New Deal. And so we'll be looking at some of the maybe lesser known topics that we've not touched on as much in some of our past New Deal materials. And then finally, on March the 31st, if you are looking for in-person PD, you're tired of doing virtual stuff, actually want to get somewhere and sit in a room with other people to do your PD, we will be in Knoxville doing a back to basics session. So again, thinking about, you know, some of our fundamental approaches for how we're using primary sources, for how we are developing historical thinking skills with our students. And if you're interested in that, you can let us know and we will help you get registered for that as well. And again, that's March 31st in Knoxville. As always, you can find all that information in our newsletter under the upcoming events link there on the first page. And so again, thank you guys so much for joining us today, and we hope to see you next month.